My best friend, Sloane, carried a profound weight of inherited pain. Her stepfather, a man she'd known since she was a toddler, had systematically eroded her self-worth with years of cruel, demeaning words, telling her she was ugly and worthless. This deep trauma manifested in her as a reflexive flinch whenever men raised their voices. I was there for her sophomore year when she finally confided in me, shaking and sobbing on my bedroom floor after yet another panic attack. My heart broke and I made a solemn promise I would help her heal. For months, I dedicated myself to rebuilding the person Sloane was meant to be. I lent her my favorite clothes because wearing them made her feel prettier and more visible. At parties, I became her human shield and wingman, walking her up to boys and initiating conversations until her own bravery kicked in. I remember the sheer, thrilling triumph the first time she successfully flirted back. Her grip on my hand was bone-crushing, but the joy in her eyes outshone any pain. I felt a selfless pride in her progress, even when it meant she started flirting with my own crushes. I rationalized it all. Sloane needed this validation more than I needed a boy. Her healing, I believed, necessitated this temporary, performative victory over the opposite sex, even if it cost me small, private heartbreaks. I chose to ignore the subtle shift from healing to habit. The harmless at first flirtation with my crushes quickly became a pattern, starting with Reese, then Caleb, and eventually every single guy I showed even a flicker of interest in. Still, I clung to the belief that this was a necessary, though painful step in her recovery. But the excuses began to crumble as I noticed a change in her behavior that had nothing to do with men. It was the performative nature of our friendship when others were watching. The way she'd sit intimately on my lap, only to use our proximity to draw a male gaze. Worse were the small, public humiliations. She'd start laughing just a little too loud at my mistakes, recounting embarrassing moments to an audience. "Remember when you tried to hit on that barista at the Gilded Mug, and he told you he was polyamorous?" she'd announce with a sugar-sweet smile. My face would burn, but I'd force a laugh to fit in. By early summer, I'd stopped sharing my crushes, but I couldn't cut her off completely. Our shared experience as ADHD minds made her the only person I felt truly unmasked around. This closeness led to a critical mistake. I agreed to let her be my +1 to a pool party thrown by my current serious crush, Orion. Sloane had spent the whole week building up my confidence about my new swimsuit, calling my body absolute fire, and I desperately wanted to believe her. We arrived at the party, and I was filled with a fragile hope that this time I could finally talk to Orion without interruption. Lying on the deck chairs, my stomach fluttered when Orion and his friends approached. Sloane, a maestro of calculated attention, immediately sat up straighter, subtly adjusting her swimsuit to maximize her cleavage. When the group didn't immediately notice her, she escalated. "Here, let me help," she declared loudly, reaching over to adjust my bikini top. She then raised her voice, loud enough for Orion's group to hear clearly, "There's not much to work with, but we can make it look a little fuller for you." My entire being went instantly cold. When Orion and his friends finally walked over, Sloane jumped up, greeting them with performative enthusiasm. Charlotte, my new name here, was so nervous about wearing a bikini, she announced, weaving a fictional narrative of supportive friendship. "I told her nobody would notice her chest anyway. Some guys prefer that shape, right, boys?" The words, delivered with a smile that was all sweetness and no light, felt like a physical blow. Some of the guys laughed. Orion's face showed clear discomfort, but he offered a nervous, polite chuckle. As I tried to slip away, Sloane grabbed my waist and squeezed my side. "Look, Charlotte's been working out. You can't really tell yet, but she's trying," she continued, each word a new layer of psychological abuse. Hiding in the bathroom, staring at my furious reflection, the truth finally crystallized. Sloane wasn't broken. She was cruel. She hadn't healed. She had simply learned her stepdad's lesson perfectly: how to use humiliation to feel powerful. The cold clarity of this realization birthed a dangerous new thought. I had to be the one to teach her a lesson. The following week, Sloane was consumed by her triumph, relentlessly detailing her upcoming date with Orion. Every text message was a victory lap. What he said, how he looked at her, and the final galling message, he said I'm different from other girls, more genuine. The same words he'd used with me right before her public shaming. She even started wearing the perfume I had mentioned Orion liked. When she arrived at my house on Saturday morning to show off her tight fire engine red dress, which I privately thought looked a bit trashy, her eyes were bright with competitive triumph. "Orion seems really into me," she gloated. "Did I mention he said I'm not like other girls?" A cold, hard resolve set in. "I made brownies," I said, delivering the line I'd practiced. "Want some for good luck?" I watched her greedily eat 3 of them, ignoring her own self-conscious protests about not wanting Orion to see her eat. What she didn't know was that each sweet bite was heavily dusted with a massive, dangerous dose of laxative powder. I knew it would take approximately 30 minutes to take effect, and the drive to Orion's house was a calculated 25 minutes. "Let me drive you," I insisted, needing the front row seat to the humiliation I had meticulously engineered. I watched, part sickened and part powerfully triumphant, as she settled into the passenger seat, oblivious to the clock ticking down on my vengeance. 5 minutes into the drive, the first tremors of my vengeance began. Sloane shifted uncomfortably, pressing a hand to her stomach. My grip tightened on the steering wheel, my eyes fixed on the road, as I fought to maintain a mask of normalcy. She nervously asked if we could stop at a nearby quick-stop gas station. I offered a seemingly supportive but completely disingenuous reply. "We're almost there, just 15 more minutes. You can use Orion's bathroom as soon as we arrive." She nodded, her face starting to show panic as her fingers dug into the door handle. The brownies were working perfectly. 10 minutes into the drive, sweat beaded on her forehead despite the air conditioning blasting. Her voice was high-pitched and laced with true fear as she begged me to find a restroom. For a fleeting second, the real friend in me resurfaced, urging me to pull over. But the memory of her toxic, sweet voice at the pool party, the image of Orion's uncomfortable laugh, and the long catalog of every guy she had stolen from me, all while I played the good friend, solidified my resolve. 10 minutes more, I repeated, driving the speed limit precisely, not daring to look at her again. 3 minutes from the destination. The sound of her frantic sobs filled the car, quickly followed by a putrid smell that made my stomach lurch. She had lost control in my passenger seat. The moment the smell hit me, the cold, powerful feeling of revenge vanished, replaced by a wave of sickening guilt. This wasn't the funny, quick humiliation I had planned. This was real, visceral misery. This was watching my friend, ruined and sobbing because I had poisoned her. But we were too close now to stop. Pulling over wouldn't help. I kept driving the final 3 minutes, pulling up to Orion's house just as Sloane stumbled out of the car, her bright red dress completely soaked and ruined. Orion stepped out of his front door, a big, welcoming smile instantly freezing and then vanishing as he registered the awful sight of Sloane. Her legs gave out and she collapsed, weeping and dry-heaving on his manicured front lawn. The situation instantly escalated beyond my control. Orion, jolted into action, started yelling for his mother, and his friend Brendan rushed out, immediately dialing 911. I sat there, paralyzed in my foul-smelling car, watching the scene unfold. Ambulances, paramedics, and the calm, concerned voice of Orion's mother. I finally forced myself out of the car and offered the pathetic, rehearsed lie, she just got sick during the drive. A lie that felt threadbare and transparent. Yet in the chaos, no one truly focused on me. As the paramedics loaded Sloane onto a stretcher, my vengeful disaster turned into a police-reported emergency. I followed the ambulance to the St. Jude's Regional Hospital, the car windows down, the stench a constant reminder of the horrific reality of what I'd... At the hospital, I found an uncomfortable plastic chair in the waiting room, trying to make myself invisible. Sloane's mother, a woman named Alara, arrived and demanded to know what happened, forcing me to repeat my flimsy lie. But the real hammer fell 2 hours later when the doctor delivered the news. Sloane was suffering from extreme laxative overdose. He stated clearly that someone either administered a dangerous amount or she took it herself. Alara's eyes fixed on me in a slow, terrifying progression of confusion, realization, and dawning horror as she answered the doctor's questions, asserting that her daughter would never do such a thing. She didn't accuse me with words, but the question in her eyes was deafening. I slipped away around midnight, driving home in a vehicle that reeked of my guilt. The next morning, the digital fallout began. 47 messages, group chats speculating, and a damning text from Orion that confirmed my fears. The doctors had found the dangerous amount of laxative, and he asked me directly if I had done it. I dropped the phone, cold with the knowledge that I was exposed. The next day at Ashworth High, the stares and whispers were deafening, the word poisoner already being circulated. Confronted point-blank by my chemistry classmate Kira, I finally crumbled, crying in the restroom and confessing the whole story: the pool party, the endless humiliation, and the poisoned brownies. Kira's words, though delivered gently, were a blunt trauma. What you did could have killed her. The inevitable call to the principal's office came, followed by the appearance of a district official. My lie was threadbare, and the principal, citing a police report and possible poisoning, insisted I go home and find a lawyer. That afternoon, my mother pulled the car over, demanding the truth. Unable to hold back the shame any longer, I confessed every detail. My mother, white-knuckled and horrified, only said, "We need a lawyer today." The police arrived that evening, speaking in hushed, heavy tones about assault charges and reckless endangerment. My appointed lawyer, Miss Alden, an exhausted-looking woman who had clearly seen it all, confirmed the grim possibilities. She asked for a full, written account of everything that happened. I wrote for hours, my hand cramping, the act of seeing my calculated cruelty on paper making the reality of my actions unbearable. The next day, I was pulled from school because someone had spray-painted "poisoner" in dripping red paint across my locker. The principal sent me home for my safety. Miss Alden called later to confirm the worst. Sloane's mother had filed an official police report accusing me of intentional poisoning. My fate was sealed. The guilt and anger battled fiercely, but the fear of my consequences began to dominate. Mr. Wu, the gentle school counselor, arranged a mediation session, a chance to show accountability. Miss Alden urged me to accept, explaining that the district attorney would view a willingness to apologize and repair the damage favorably. After 3 days of agonizing practice with Kira, who insisted I own my actions without excuses, I sat across from Sloane. She looked diminished, and fear flickered in her eyes. I took a shaky breath and managed the words. "I'm sorry. What I did was dangerous and wrong." Sloane was first defensive, bringing up the humiliation, but when I simply accepted her accusation, she broke, sobbing as she admitted she had been cruel, that she had knowingly used me to prove her power, and that she had learned her abusive techniques from her stepfather. She confessed to being jealous of my effortless self-acceptance. The honesty was painful, but it finally cut through the cycle of blame. We both cried, accepting that our friendship was over, but agreeing that my actions were more dangerous and warranted consequence. Sloane, in an act of powerful grace, offered to write a statement to the district attorney, confirming my remorse. The plea deal was finalized. A guilty plea to reckless endangerment, 200 hours of community service, $10,000 in medical bill payments, and mandatory counseling. My mother's quiet statement, "You are guilty, honey. What you did was dangerous," had finally settled the matter. My journey to redemption began with my first shift at the Riverside Community Food Bank. The simple, honest work of sorting boxes quieted the chaos in my mind, a stark contrast to the destruction I had caused. In therapy with Dr. Morgan, The conversation shifted from blame to responsibility, focusing on the difference between healthy and destructive power. I had to confront the toxic satisfaction I'd felt right before giving Sloan the brownies. 2 months into my service, an older volunteer offered a pivotal piece of wisdom. The question isn't whether you were a bad person, but whether you're going to learn from this or let it define you. The process of growth was slow and steady. I wrote letters to my younger self, realizing I had given Sloan too much power over my own self-worth. Passing her in the hallways became less painful, a necessary awkwardness as we both moved along our parallel, separate healing paths. I was grateful when I heard she was in therapy. Finishing my service hours, the coordinator handed me a heartfelt college recommendation letter. Proof, finally, that I was capable of being seen as thoughtful and dedicated, not just dangerous. My college applications, which required disclosure of the misdemeanor, were honest essays about accountability and growth. I got into my top choice. At graduation, Sloan and I exchanged a genuine, if quiet, acknowledgement. We were both moving on. My final act was to sign up for peer counseling training in college, hoping to help others avoid the destructive choices I had made. The pieces of the first vengeful letter I wrote to Sloan, full of excuses, went into the trash for good. My story wasn't ending with revenge, but with responsibility.